Hello everyone, it's Mr. Petrie here joining you for Assembly today. I hope you all had a good break over the spring holiday and are all enjoying being back at school. And it's good to be with you again for Assembly this week. For our Assembly today, I'd like to speak to you about respecting other people who may be different from us. They may look different, speak differently, come from a different part of the world. There may be all kinds of reasons why people might be different from us, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't respect them. The person I want to tell you about today lived 200 years ago. He was one of the most famous men in Britain, and he's still remembered today. Films and TV series have been made about his life, and hundreds of books have been written about him. His name was William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was born on the 24th of August 1759 at his family home in the High Street, Hull, the son of a wealthy merchant. Sadly, when he was 10 years old, his father died, and he went south to live with his aunt and uncle, also called William, and his aunt was Hannah. They lived in a house in Wimbledon, the place where the tennis matches are played, but at that time it was just a small village a few miles from London. Wilberforce studied at Cambridge University, and while he was at Cambridge University, he met another young man called William Pitt. William Pitt became the Prime Minister of Britain eventually, and Pitt and Wilberforce were great friends for the rest of their lives. When he was young, one of the places William Wilberforce was taken to was the village of Olney. They went there to visit John Newton. John Newton had at one time been a slave trader. He captained ships that took captured Africans from Africa to work on the plantations in the Caribbean, where they were sold as slaves. And this is what's known as the triangular trade. And John Newton was a minister of the Church of England, and at that time he was serving in that village of Olney. By the second half of the 18th century, Britain was the largest slaving nation in the world. But by the 1780s, people were beginning to question the morality of this trade in human lives and human misery. And among those questioning the slave trade was the former slave trader, John Newton. Newton had become a Christian, and then, as I said, went on to become a minister in the Church of England. He was one of the great campaigners against the slave trade and slavery. He wrote books and pamphlets about his experiences, talking from his own first-hand knowledge of the horrors of the slave trade. He was also a great hymn writer. He wrote hundreds of hymns, and his most famous and well-known hymn is probably Amazing Grace. As well as going to visit Newton in Olney, he was also a frequent visitor to the Wilberforce home in Wimbledon, and he was a great influence on the young William Wilberforce. In the general election held in 1780, William Wilberforce was elected as the MP for Hull. He was only 21 years old. His great friend from his university days, William Pitt, was also elected as an MP. Later, Wilberforce went on to be the MP for Yorkshire. Wilberforce was a Christian, but that didn't really mean very much to him. Until in 1785, he understood what it really meant to follow Jesus, that it was about how you lived your life, and that you had to be busy making the world a better place for everyone. 2 years later, in 1787, he became the voice in Parliament for the anti-slave trade movement, and he devoted the rest of his life to work for the abolition of the slave trade and of slavery itself. Another of those who was central to the campaign for the abolition of slavery was Olodo Equiano, and he was one of the few former slaves whose voice was actually heard during the campaign. He wrote his autobiography, which was published in 1789, telling his story as a former slave, and he describes in it how he was kidnapped with his sister when he was about 11 years old. He was sold by local slave traders in Africa and then shipped across the Atlantic to Barbados and then on to the United States to Virginia. From 1788, Wilberforce presented a bill every year for the abolition of the slave trade, but it took until 1807 before Parliament abolished the slave trade in British ships. And after that, British ships were no longer allowed to trade in human lives. That was almost 20 years of campaigning in Parliament for the abolition of the slave trade. In 1789, in his abolition speech that year, Wilberforce said, "Having heard all of this, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know." Having told Parliament all that the horrors of the slave trade, he was telling them they could choose to ignore it, but they could never again say that they weren't aware of what was happening on British ships. William Wilberforce continued in Parliament until 1825, when he stepped down as an MP because of ill health. He continued his campaigning on lots of different subjects, including RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. He also continued to campaign for the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. And on Friday, the 26th of July, 1833, an act was passed in Parliament which abolished slavery in British possessions. Wilberforce died a few days later, on Monday, the 29th of July. He lived long enough to see his life's work accomplished. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, a great honour for someone who played such an important role in British history. And he was buried close to his friend William Pitt. There's still a need for us to act as Wilberforce and the other abolitionists did 200 years ago, to work for a better world where everyone is respected, no matter the colour of their skin, how they look, how they speak, where they come from. It's important that we treat everyone with respect, and that, as William Wilberforce learnt, that we work for a better world, because that's what Jesus would want us to do. For our time of reflection today, I'm going to show you something that William Wilberforce once said. He said, "So enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the slave trade's wickedness appear that my own mind was completely made up for abolition. Let the consequences be what they would, I from this time determined that I would never rest until I had effected its abolition." Maybe you'd like to think for a few moments about what Wilberforce meant when he said those words. And now, a prayer. Dear God, thank you that you value each one of us. Please help us to treat others with respect. Help us to embrace differences between us. Help us to love others, even if they are very different from us. Help us to see the value in each individual person. Amen. and we're going to finish today with the song Bind Us Together. I've been really pleased to join you for your assembly this week. I hope you enjoyed the story of William Wilberforce, and I look forward to being with you again in a couple of weeks' time. Till then, take care everyone. Bye.